The grand halls of the Galactic Summit shimmered with golden light, reflecting off the massive crystalline domes that enclosed the conference chamber. Hundreds of alien delegates from powerful civilizations gathered, their voices echoing in an endless hum of discussion and arrogance. At the farthest corner of the hall, sitting quietly, was Daniel Cross, the only human present. He adjusted his simple Earth-made suit and observed the crowd. Unlike the towering, heavily armored warriors and noble dignitaries around him, Daniel looked ordinary, just another human from a planet barely acknowledged in galactic affairs. The Galactic Summit was where the strongest empires made their decisions. Earth was allowed a minor seat, but no one took humans seriously. The council leaders barely looked at Daniel when he arrived. Humans were small players in the grand scheme of the universe. At least, that's what everyone believed. A deep voice interrupted his thoughts. "Human," sneered a Torgith warlord, his massive tusks gleaming under the hall's lights. "Why does your kind even attend these summits? You contribute nothing. Earth is weak." Laughter followed from several other delegates. A Xiphorian diplomat, with his translucent blue skin and multiple glowing eyes, nodded in agreement. "Indeed, why is the human here? The affairs of great empires do not concern his people." Daniel smiled politely. He was used to this. The aliens mocked Earth's lack of interstellar power. Humans had no advanced warships, no planet-destroying weapons, and no vast armies. But what they didn't understand was that strength wasn't always about brute force. Before Daniel could respond, the room suddenly fell silent. A tall figure entered the hall, a woman with golden-hued skin, wearing a flowing royal robe embedded with glowing symbols. Princess Xyra of the Varkari Empire. Xyra was one of the most powerful figures in the galaxy. Her empire controlled dozens of star systems, and her family had ruled for generations. The moment she stepped forward, the other delegates bowed in respect. But then something happened that no one expected. Xyra walked past all the great rulers and stopped in front of Daniel. The entire hall watched in stunned silence as she gazed at him with piercing golden eyes. Then, in a clear and commanding voice, she said the words that shook the entire summit. "I choose this human as my inheritance recipient." Gasps filled the hall. Whispers spread like wildfire. The alien delegates looked at each other in disbelief. Had they heard correctly? The Varkari nobles, standing behind Xyra, immediately objected. "This is madness." One of them growled. "A human? He is unworthy." Another noble, a tall reptilian warrior, stepped forward in fury. "The inheritance belongs to the Varkari bloodline, not some outsider." But Xyra remained calm, her eyes never leaving Daniel's. "My decision is final." Daniel, meanwhile, was still trying to process what had just happened. Inheritance recipient. What did that even mean? Your Highness," he said, clearing his throat. "I think there's been some mistake. I'm just here as a representative. I don't own anything of value." Xyra smiled slightly. "You will soon." The Galactic Council leader, a towering insectoid alien, finally spoke. "Princess Xyra, by law, your inheritance includes all your wealth, lands, and military assets. Are you saying you are granting everything to this human?" A deep hush fell over the room. The implications were enormous. The Varkari Empire was vast. It controlled not just planets but entire fleets, armies, and secret technologies that even the Council feared. If Xyra truly handed all of it over to a human, it would shift the balance of power in the galaxy. The laughter that had once mocked Daniel was now gone. Now the same aliens who had dismissed him looked at him in shock and disbelief. Daniel exhaled slowly. He had just gone from being a nobody to one of the most powerful figures in the universe, and he had no idea why. But he had a feeling that things were about to get very, very dangerous. Daniel stood frozen as the entire Galactic Summit erupted into chaos. Powerful rulers, military generals, and noble diplomats from across the universe argued loudly, their voices clashing like a storm. "This is unacceptable," a Xiphorian delegate shouted, his multiple glowing eyes flashing in anger. A human cannot inherit the Valkyrie Empire. The Torgeth warlord slammed his massive fist onto the table, cracking the stone surface. Humans are weak. They have no fleets, no warriors. This is an insult to our empires. Despite the uproar, Princess Styra stood firm, her golden eyes calm. I have chosen, she said, and no law forbids me from passing my inheritance to whomever I wish. Daniel, meanwhile, was still struggling to process what was happening. Just moments ago, he had been a minor Earth diplomat, ignored by the galaxy's most powerful leaders. Now he was apparently one of the most powerful people in the universe, and he hadn't even done anything. He took a deep breath. Your Highness, he said cautiously, looking at Styra. I don't understand. Why me? Styra tilted her head slightly, as if studying him. Because you are human. That answer didn't help at all. Before Daniel could ask more, an elderly Valkyrie noble stepped forward, his face filled with rage. This is madness. You risk our empire's future with this foolishness. He turned to the Galactic Council. I demand a challenge. The human must prove he is worthy. The council leader, a towering insectoid alien with a voice that vibrated through the air, nodded. According to our laws, a recipient of such power must face a trial. Daniel frowned. Wait, trial? What kind of trial? The council leader's mandibles clicked. A test of survival, intelligence, and strength. If you fail, you will lose everything, including your life. Daniel's heart pounded. Of course, because why would anything be easy? Styra, however, remained confident. She turned to Daniel. You are capable of more than you know. That didn't exactly make him feel better. The trial begins. Within an hour, Daniel was escorted to a massive arena on the Valkyrie homeworld. The Grand Colosseum stretched for miles, its walls lined with glowing rooms of ancient warriors. Thousands of spectators filled the seats, eager to witness the challenge. Daniel stood at the center of the arena, feeling completely out of place. Across from him, 3 alien challengers emerged, each one a warrior from different powerful empires. A towering 4-armed Garluk brute covered in thick armor. A speed-focused serpentine assassin, moving like a shadow. The heavily armed Rithian marksman, his eyes glowing with laser precision. Daniel gulped. He wasn't a fighter. He wasn't a warrior. He was just a guy from Earth. The announcer's voice boomed through the arena. The human must defeat these challengers to prove his worth. The crowd roared. The alien warriors charged forward. The human advantage. Daniel's instincts screamed at him to run. But then he noticed something. The Garluk brute was powerful but slow. The serpentine assassin was fast but predictable. The Rithian marksman was precise but focused only on long-range attacks. They all had strengths, but they also had weaknesses. And if humans were good at one thing, it was adapting. The Garluk swung a massive fist, but Daniel dove aside, making the brute crash into the ground. The serpentine lunged, but Daniel grabbed a handful of arena dust and threw it at its sensitive eyes. The Rithian took aim, but Daniel rolled behind cover, using his opponent's own armor as a shield. The crowd gasped. No human should have been able to last even a minute in this fight. But Daniel was thinking, not just fighting. The unthinkable happens. Minutes passed, and the battle continued. Daniel dodged, tricked, and outmaneuvered his opponents. He wasn't stronger, he wasn't faster, but he was smarter. The Garluk, now furious, charged like a wild beast, only for Daniel to sidestep at the last second, sending the brute crashing into the arena wall. The serpentine tried to strike from behind, only for Daniel to grab a loose metal pole and swing it like a bat, knocking the assassin unconscious. The Rithian marksman, seeing his allies defeated, tried to retreat, but Daniel was already on him. A well-aimed kick sent the Rithian's rifle flying, and within seconds, Daniel had won. The arena fell silent. Then thunderous applause erupted. No one had expected the human to win. A new future. As Daniel stood victorious, breathing heavily, he saw Xyra watching him with a knowing expression. She had known. She had known humans had something the others didn't. The council leader stepped forward. The human has passed the trial. The inheritance stands. The alien nobles, once mocking him, now looked at him with fear and respect. Daniel Cross, a nobody from Earth, had just changed the galaxy. And he had a feeling this was only the beginning. Daniel stood in the grand halls of the Valkyrie Royal Palace, still trying to process what had just happened. A few hours ago, he had been a minor Earth diplomat. Now he was the heir to one of the most powerful empires in the galaxy, and he had won his first battle in the arena, proving his worth to billions of aliens. The corridors were massive, built for beings much taller than him, with glowing symbols on the walls and floating orbs that provided soft golden light. Valkyrie guards stood in perfect rows, their eyes watching him with caution, as if still unsure whether to respect or suspect him. At his side, Princess Xyra walked with silent grace, her long robes flowing behind her. Unlike the others, she looked calm, almost pleased. Daniel sighed. "I still don't get it, Xyra. Why me?" Xyra stopped and turned to him. "Because humans are underestimated." Daniel frowned. "And that makes me worthy of controlling an empire." She gave a small smile. "Not yet, but you will be." That answer wasn't exactly comforting. A growing threat. As they continued walking, an urgent message came through Xyra's communicator. She listened for a moment, then her expression darkened. "The High Council has called an emergency meeting," she said. "It seems some of the noble families are not happy about your survival." Daniel sighed. Of course they aren't. They entered the council chamber, a vast circular hall with a floating holographic table at its center. Around it sat some of the most powerful beings in the empire, Valkyrie nobles, military generals, and high-ranking officials. As soon as Daniel entered, a deep, commanding voice spoke. "This human is a mistake." Daniel turned to see Lord Vecran, a towering Valkyrie noble with dark silver skin and piercing red eyes. He was one of the most influential figures in the empire, and by the way he looked at Daniel, he clearly wanted him gone. Vecran continued, "The human only won because his opponents were careless. He is not fit to rule." Another noble, Lady Sarna, nodded in agreement. "A single victory does not make a ruler. The human does not understand our ways, our traditions, or our enemies." Daniel crossed his arms. "Funny, I don't remember asking for this job, but here I am." Vecran's eyes narrowed. "Then step down before you bring disaster upon us all." Xyra spoke before Daniel could reply. "He passed the trial. The law is clear. He is the heir." Vecran clenched his fists. Laws can be rewritten. Daniel could see it now. These people didn't just doubt him. They feared him. Not because he was dangerous, but because they didn't understand him. The assassination attempt. The meeting ended with no clear resolution. Daniel left the chamber, knowing full well that many in the council wanted him dead. Later that night, he stood on a high balcony of the palace, looking at the alien city below. Massive towers stretched toward the sky, with flying ships moving between them like glowing fireflies. The air smelled different, crisp, metallic, and charged with energy. "This doesn't feel real," he muttered to himself. Then, a whisper of movement. Daniel's instincts screamed. He ducked just as a sharp energy blade sliced through the air where his head had been a second ago. A shadowy figure, dressed in black tactical armor, landed silently in front of him. The assassin's eyes glowed faintly, and without hesitation, he attacked again. Daniel barely dodged as another blade came for his throat. His heart pounded. He had no weapon, no armor, just his mind. The assassin was fast, but Daniel had already learned one important lesson in the arena. Think, don't fight fair. As the assassin lunged again, Daniel suddenly grabbed a nearby metal tray from a table and threw it like a frisbee. It wasn't a weapon, but it was unexpected. The assassin flinched just long enough for Daniel to kick him in the chest, sending him stumbling backward. But the assassin recovered quickly. He pulled out a small plasma gun and aimed. Bang! A red energy blast struck the assassin in the side. He fell to the ground, unmoving. Daniel turned to see Xyra standing behind him, her royal blaster smoking from the shot. She lowered the weapon. "I thought you might need some help." Daniel exhaled, his heart still racing. "Yeah, thanks for that." Guards rushed in, securing the body. One of them looked at Xyra and shook his head. "He's a hired assassin. No markings, no identification. But his weapons suggest someone in the High Council ordered this." Daniel ran a hand through his hair. "So, they aren't even hiding it anymore." Xyra looked at him with a serious expression. "You are more dangerous than they expected. And now, they will try harder to kill you." Daniel let out a humorless chuckle. Fantastic. A human's next move. By morning, the news of the assassination attempt had spread. The Empire's citizens were talking. The human heir was being targeted. Some saw him as weak and unworthy. But others saw a man who had survived. A man who refused to bow down. Daniel sat in the royal chamber, looking at the reports. His enemies were growing. He needed allies. He needed a plan. He turned to Xyra. "If they want to play dirty, we'll play smarter. It's time to show them exactly what a human can do." For the first time since this all started, Daniel wasn't just reacting. He was planning. And soon, the galaxy would see. A human was not to be underestimated. The failed assassination attempt had changed everything. Daniel was no longer just a symbol of an unwanted inheritance. He was now a target, a real threat to the power of the Valkyrie noble families who had controlled the Empire for centuries. As he sat in the royal chamber, reviewing security reports, Daniel could feel the weight of his new reality. Every moment was now a battle for survival. Across the room, Princess Styra watched him with careful eyes. She was calm, but Daniel knew her well enough by now. She was worried. Finally, she broke the silence. "What's your next move?" Daniel exhaled, leaning back in his chair. "If I keep playing defense, they'll keep attacking. I need to take control before they make another attempt on my life." Zyra nodded. "Then you must act fast. Your enemies will not wait." Unlikely alliances. Daniel knew he needed support, but not from the noble families. They would never accept him. Instead, he turned his attention to the ones who had no power, the working-class aliens, soldiers, and traders who had long been ignored by the ruling elite. With Xyra's help, Daniel arranged a secret meeting deep within the palace. Representatives from the Empire's military, industry, and outer colonies arrived, all uncertain of why a human had called them. When they gathered, Daniel stood before them. Unlike the nobles, these aliens didn't look at him with hatred, just curiosity. He didn't give a speech full of royal words. Instead, he spoke like a human. "The noble families see me as a mistake," he began, "but I see an empire full of people who deserve better. The same families who rule over you are the same ones who tried to have me killed. That tells me one thing. They fear change. And that means it's time for one." The room fell silent. Some aliens looked at each other, uncertain. Others nodded slowly. Finally, a battle-worn general stepped forward. His gray skin was scarred from wars, and his 4 golden eyes locked onto Daniel. "You speak boldly for a human," the general said. "But what do you offer in return for our loyalty?" Daniel met his gaze. "A future where you don't serve cowards who hide behind wealth. A future where warriors and workers are given what they deserve." The general studied him for a long moment. Then, slowly, he nodded. "I will hear more." That was the first step. The nobles strike back. The news of Daniel's secret meeting spread faster than he expected. The noble families knew what he was doing. and they weren't going to let it happen. 3 days later, during a royal council session, Lord Vecran stood and slammed his steel-tipped staff onto the floor, demanding silence. His red eyes burned with anger as he looked at Daniel. This human is dangerous. He is gathering support from the lower classes and the military. If we allow this to continue, we will lose control. Lady Sarna spoke next, her voice sharp. We must act before it is too late. A murmur of agreement filled the chamber. Daniel expected this, and he was ready. He stood, keeping his expression calm. Let me understand this correctly. You want to remove me because I spoke to the people you've ignored. Vecran's fists clenched. You are manipulating them. Daniel let out a small laugh. No, I'm listening to them, and maybe that's why they trust me more than they trust you. The council erupted in whispers. Some nobles looked furious. Others looked uncertain. Before Vecran could respond, the doors to the council chamber burst open. A Valkyrie messenger rushed in, his face pale. My lords, the outer colonies have declared their support for the human heir. For the first time, Vecran had no words. The empire was beginning to shift, and Daniel was the reason why. The silent war begins. That night, Daniel and Sarah stood on the palace balcony, watching the city lights below. Zira crossed her arms. You've forced their hand. They will not allow this to continue. Daniel nodded. I know. That's why I need to strike first. She turned to him, her expression unreadable. You are not the same man I met when this began. You are thinking like a ruler now. Daniel smiled slightly. I don't know about that. But I do know one thing. If the nobles want to fight, I'm going to make sure they regret it. And with that, the silent war for the empire had begun. The air inside the palace was heavy with tension. The nobles had been humiliated in the council chamber, but Daniel knew they wouldn't back down. They had ruled for centuries, and they wouldn't let a human take that away without a fight. Daniel sat in his private quarters, staring at the holographic map of the empire. His support was growing. Military leaders, traders, and workers had started to rally behind him, believing in his vision. But that also meant his enemies would act soon. Princess Zyra stood beside him, arms crossed. You have forced the nobles into a corner. When powerful people feel threatened, they become dangerous. Daniel nodded, which means we need to move first. The nobles' secret plan. Meanwhile, in a hidden chamber deep within the palace, Lord Vecran and Lady Sarna met with their allies. Daniel must be removed immediately, Vecran growled. The longer he stays, the more the people support him. We must act now. Lady Sarna smirked. Then let's make sure he never sees another sunrise. They devised a plan, an assassination attempt during the upcoming royal ceremony. It would be the perfect place, with thousands of people present. No one would suspect a thing. The unexpected betrayal. As Daniel prepared for the ceremony, one of his guards, a young alien named Ralvik, entered his chamber. His face was pale, and his eyes darted around nervously. My lord, I have something to tell you. Daniel frowned. What is it? Ralvik hesitated, then whispered, The nobles plan to kill you at the ceremony. It will happen when you stand before the crowd. For a moment, Daniel felt a chill run down his spine. But instead of fear, he felt something else. Determination. He smiled slightly. Then let's make sure they regret trying. Turning the trap against them. Daniel and Sarah worked quickly. Instead of canceling the ceremony, they decided to use it as a trap. Daniel would still go, but his best warriors would be hidden among the crowd, watching for the attack. When the day of the ceremony arrived, the grand hall was filled with thousands of spectators. The nobles sat in their high seats, their expressions unreadable. Daniel stepped onto the royal platform, feeling the eyes of the entire empire on him. He could almost sense the assassins in the crowd, waiting for their moment. Then, it happened. A flash of movement, a blade soaring through the air. But Daniel was ready. He dodged to the side, And in that instant, Cyrus' warriors sprang into action. The assassins barely had time to react before they were taken down, one by one. The crowd erupted in shock and fear as Daniel turned to face the nobles, his voice calm but cold. "Did you really think I wouldn't see this coming?" The entire hall fell silent. Lord Vecran and Lady Sarna looked at him with pure hatred, but Daniel just smiled. "You failed. And now it's my turn." The nobles had made their move. Now, Daniel would take the empire for himself. The grand hall was filled with silence. Thousands of eyes were fixed on Daniel, who stood on the royal platform. The failed assassination attempt had exposed the nobles' true nature, and now they had no place to hide. Princess Xyra stepped forward, her voice strong and clear. "These nobles have betrayed the empire. They tried to kill the one chosen by royal blood. Do they still deserve to rule?" The crowd murmured, voices rising in anger. The common citizens, traders and soldiers who had suffered under the nobles' rule now saw them for what they truly were, selfish and corrupt. Lord Vecran clenched his fists. "You think this is over, human? The council will never accept you." Daniel tilted his head. "The council? You mean the same council that tried to murder me? I don't think their opinions matter anymore." The crowd erupted in cheers. The people had seen enough of the nobles' cruelty. They wanted change. They wanted a new leader. Seizing the throne. With the nobles exposed and disgraced, Daniel knew he had to act quickly. That night, he and his loyal supporters moved to secure the palace. Elite soldiers loyal to the nobles still guarded parts of the royal city, but many of them had started to question their loyalty. Xyra met Daniel in the war room. "Some nobles will never surrender. They will try to fight back." Daniel nodded. "Then we give them a choice: stand with the people or fall with the old empire." The Noble Rebellion. The next morning, the remaining nobles gathered their private armies. Lord Vecran and Lady Sarna, along with a few others, refused to surrender. They declared war against Daniel, claiming he was a false ruler. The city streets became a battleground. Loyalists fought against the noble armies, but this time, the people were on Daniel's side. Workers, traders, and soldiers who had suffered under the nobles' rule took up arms. Daniel himself led the charge. "We end this today," he shouted as he marched through the streets with his forces. The final confrontation. The battle raged for hours. The noble forces were strong and well-trained, but they lacked something important: the support of the people. One by one, their forces fell apart. Their own soldiers started surrendering, realizing they were fighting for the wrong side. In the end, only Vecran and Sarna remained, trapped in the grand hall where the assassination attempt had failed. Daniel and Xyra walked into the chamber, their weapons drawn. Vecran's face was twisted with rage. "You think you can rule this empire, human? You don't belong here." Daniel's expression was calm. "Then why do your own people support me?" Lady Sarna sighed, defeat in her eyes. She looked at Xyra. "You truly believe in him?" Xyra didn't hesitate. "Yes, and so does the empire." Vecran let out a furious roar and charged at Daniel, but it was over. With a quick movement, Daniel dodged and struck him down. Sarna fell to her knees. She knew the fight was over. "Do what you must," she whispered. But Daniel surprised her. "I'm not here for revenge. I'm here to build something better. The birth of a new era." With the nobles defeated, Daniel stood before the people. "This empire has suffered under the rule of greed and power for too long," he said. "But today we build something new, together." The people cheered his name, and for the first time in history, a human sat on the imperial throne. The old order had fallen. The future belonged to those willing to fight for it. The sun rose over the imperial capital, casting golden light on the towering structures of the ancient city. For the first time in centuries, the streets were filled with hope instead of fear. Daniel stood on the royal balcony, looking down at the gathered crowd. The people had chosen him, a human, as their new leader. It was something no one had imagined before, but after everything that had happened, it no longer seemed impossible. Beside him, Princess Zyra stood proudly, her deep violet eyes scanning the faces of their supporters. The empire had suffered under the rule of corrupt nobles for far too long. Today marked the beginning of a new era. The first decree. Daniel turned to Zyra. "They're waiting for us." She nodded. "Then let's give them a reason to believe in this new empire." Daniel stepped forward. "People of the empire," his voice echoed across the plaza. "For too long, this empire has been ruled by greed, power, and fear. But today that ends." The crowd erupted in cheers. "From this day forward," Daniel continued, "the empire belongs to its people. No longer will the nobility decide your fate. No longer will corruption rule over justice. Together, we will build something better." The cheers grew louder. The energy of the people was electric, a force greater than any army. A divided council. But not everyone was happy. In the shadows of the great hall, a group of surviving nobles whispered among themselves. One of them, a gray-skinned noble with piercing yellow eyes, scowled. "We cannot let a human rule us. This is a disgrace." Another noble shook his head. "The people have already accepted him. If we resist now, we risk another war." A third noble sighed. "Perhaps it is time to adapt. The empire is changing, whether we like it or not." The strength of humanity. That evening, Daniel walked through the city, accompanied by Zyra and a group of loyal warriors. Everywhere he went, the people greeted him with respect, not fear. One old merchant approached him. "You are different from the nobles before you, human. You do not look down on us." Daniel smiled. "Why would I? I was just like you before all of this. I know what it means to struggle." A young alien child ran up to him, holding out a small handmade flag. "This is for you, Emperor Daniel." He knelt down, accepting the gift with a warm smile. "Thank you. But you don't need to call me Emperor. Just Daniel is fine." Zyra watched him, admiration shining in her eyes. "You truly are different. The future of the empire." That night, Daniel and Zyra stood in the royal chamber, looking at the stars. Zyra sighed. "I never thought this day would come. A human ruling the empire." Daniel chuckled. "Neither did I. But now that we're here, we have to make sure we don't fail them." Zyra nodded. "We won't. Together, we will rebuild this empire into something stronger than it ever was." Daniel turned to her, his expression serious. "And you, will you stand by my side?" She smiled. "Always." As the night deepened, the empire took its first steps toward a new future, one where humans and aliens stood together, not as enemies, but as allies. The old empire was gone. A new era had begun.